Welcome back, everybody, to another week of Sunday School here at the Lighthouse Church of the Nazarene in Moravia, Iowa, where we're going through the book of Job. This week we're in Job chapter 38. Well, today is the day. We've been studying the book of Job now for 38 weeks. Today is the day that we finally hear from God. God has basically been silent for the last 36 chapters here. The last person we've heard from was a man named Elihu. Elihu, we've heard him from chapter 32 to chapter 37 here. Now, we don't know if Elihu was done talking and God cut him off, or if God allowed Elihu to finish what he was saying and then started speaking. We don't know that, but what do we do know? We do know we're going to hear from God this week. So we're in Job chapter 38. Let's get out our Bibles and let's follow along. Job chapter 38, verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job. We've been having these long conversations. Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and Job, they've all been having dialogue between each other. Then Elihu shows up and starts talking. And finally, God answers. He says, Then the Lord answered Job. Let's just stop right here. Who is he talking to? Is he talking to the entire group? No, he's actually singling out Job, is he not? Says the Lord answered Job, and next he's gonna say, prepare yourself like a man. He's not, singular. Prepare yourself like a man, not prepare all yourselves like men. So he's just singling out Job here. It's kind of like the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus. It says, he heard a voice, but he says the other people around him didn't hear it. So it's like he just got singled out. We find that also in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 10. Daniel had a vision. He says, Daniel, I alone had the vision, but the people are with me. They did not see it. Daniel said that. So I think Job is getting singled out here. He might be the only one that can hear this voice. That's probably what I'm thinking. All right, verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, let's stop and look at this. What does that mean that God answered Job out of the whirlwind? Well, a whirlwind probably means like a tempest or a storm. And we see this at other spots in the Bible. The prophet Elijah, he went up to heaven in a chariot of fire. It says he was caught up in a whirlwind and taken up into heaven. If you go to the book of Ezekiel, it's Ezekiel 1:4. God showed up to Ezekiel in a whirlwind. I like to think about it like this: like it's probably a dark cloud showed up and God spoke out of it. And we actually see that happen in other parts of Scripture. If you go to Matthew chapter 17, in the Transfiguration, Jesus went up on a high mountain, his three disciples with him, Peter, James, and John, and it says he was transfigured before them. And behold, he stood with them, Moses and Elijah. And then it says, and then a great cloud came and overshadowed them and said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. So when it says that God spoke out of the whirlwind, I think of it as a big cloud that God spoke out of. We also saw this happen on Mount Sinai. Remember when God showed up to the Israelites on Mount Sinai? Big cloud, lightning, thunder, and clashes. So we've seen that before. So I think that's what it means when God spoke out of the whirlwind. I think it means he spoke out of the cloud. So then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now, first of all, what do you think Job's reaction is to this here when God shows up and says, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? What do you think Job's reaction is? The interesting thing here actually is Job's closing words were this: let the Almighty answer me. If you go back to Job chapter 31, those were verse 35. Those were Job's closing words. Let the Almighty answer me. I want God to speak to me. And now when he does do it, I imagine Job's reaction here is, uh-oh, I might have bit off more than I can chew. I maybe shouldn't have done that. I compare this to when your parents used your middle name. Craig William Swaby, you knew you were in trouble. I think Job knows when he's in trouble here. When we go through the Bible, man's reaction in the Bible when God speaks is usually fright. Clear back, I was just talking about the transfiguration when that bright cloud came and overshadowed the disciples and said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. It says the disciples fell on their faces and they were greatly afraid. If you go back to the book of Exodus, when God showed up on the Mount Sinai, if you go to Exodus chapter 20, Verse 18, the people's reaction to it was they told Moses, you go up and talk to him, but we're not going to. We're going to stay right here. And it says they trembled with fear. And even when we go to the book of Revelations, John the Beloved, God shows up to him and gives him the revelation. I said revelations. In the book of Revelation, when God shows up to him, John says, I fell at his feet as dead. And this was John. John traveled with Jesus for 3 years, saw him in his risen state. But when Jesus shows up in his glorified state, what does John do? Falls in fear. So man's reaction to seeing God in the Bible is usually fright. Now, let's think about this too. God doesn't seem happy here. Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now, do any of us, do you or I, do we appreciate when people say things about us that are untrue or when people misrepresent us? Of course not. So, how much more so does God not appreciate it when people misrepresent him and that he feels like that's what these people were doing? God didn't care for the conversation that took place between Job and his three friends. Let's think about this. 2 Timothy 2:15 says this. It says, be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a workman who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. We're supposed to rightly divide the word of truth. We're supposed to find out what the scripture says. It's why in the book of James it says, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that you shall receive a stricter judgment. These three friends and Job, they misrepresented God. How much more should you or I, God's ambassadors on this earth, representatives of Jesus Christ, how much more should we not be concerned about how we are representing God? That's what we do here. Deuteronomy 4:2 says this. It says, you shall not add to the word that I command, nor take away from it. That's how we represent God. That's how we're ambassadors. We rightly divide the word of truth. God wasn't happy. He felt like he wasn't represented right. One last thing I want to point out here off verse 2, where God says, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? We're 7 minutes in on this and we went through 2 verses. This isn't good. But one last thing that we need to realize. That whole conversation between Job and his 3 friends and Elihu, God heard every word that was said. God heard every word. Why is this significant? Because sometimes we feel like God's not paying attention to us. Sometimes we feel like, God, you're not seeing what I'm going through here. Do you even hear me when I pray? But God knows everything we're going through. There's nothing hidden from his sight. And we need to realize this. He hears us when we call him. Psalms 4:1 says that. And we also need to remember this. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 that says God will not allow us to be tempted beyond what we are able. I think sometimes we think like, God, you have too much. You think too highly of me. You're giving me too much here. But we need to remember this. The only reason that Job is suffering, is because he's the best man for the job. And that's the truth. That's the only reason Job's going through what he's doing. So you and I need to remember that when things are getting tough, maybe we're the best man for the job. Verse 3, this is God talking. Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you and you will answer me. Now, God's basically about to give Job a science test here is what he's doing. But these are things that you and I, that we can kind of comprehend, but we have no idea the answer to. These are things that man would have no knowledge of. So God's basically going to give Job a science test. But we need to think about this also. God doesn't just come out and start explaining to Job what's going on. So God shows up, God starts talking. He doesn't go, hey, Job, Satan made an accusation and we had to set him straight and thank you for what you did. No, he doesn't explain any about this. He just kind of puts Job in his place. So what can we take away from this? Well, you and I, we don't need to understand everything God is doing. Deuteronomy 29:29 says that the secret things belong to the Lord. You and I aren't always going to know what God's doing, but we just have to put our trust in him. That's what we can take away from this. So, verse 3, now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you and you shall answer me. Verse 4, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To where were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? So This is the first category of the test that God gives Job, the creation of the earth. Where were you when all of this got planned out? Surely you must know. You're so smart. You think you know everything. Notice how it says here in verse 7, when all the sons of God shouted for joy. The sons of God would be the angels. Now, we don't know exactly when God created the angels, but it had to be before the seventh day of creation because they all sang for joy. Let's keep going here. Verse 8, or who shut in the sea with the doors, when it burst forth and issued from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band. When I fixed my limit for it, and set bars and doors. When I said, this far you may come, but no further, and here your proud waves must stop. There's the second category. There's the oceans. God said, this is where you're going to go. And isn't it interesting that he made as a border sand? I would have used hard rocks so it couldn't wash away, but God in his wisdom used sand and it works perfectly. Verse 12, have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? Verse 14, it takes on form like clay under a seal, and stands out like garment. And from the wicked their light is withheld, and the upraised arm is broken. So there's the third category, day and night. If you think about it, the rising and setting of the sun is so mundane that we don't even think about it, do we? But we need to realize this. God is not only the creator of the earth, he's also the sustainer of the earth. He's the one that makes sure all these things just keep working in motion exactly like they were designed and planned to do. Verse 16, have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Death is really the last great mystery, is it not? As long as we're in the land of the living, we don't get much insight into it. But to be able to know it, we have to experience it. And experience it, we will all do. But it's just that last great mystery that there's just not a lot that we can know about it. Jesus told the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. But we don't know the path that looks like to get from here to there. Verse 18, have you comprehended the breadth of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Now, there's a couple interesting things in this little passage here from 16 to 18. First off, you see where it says, have you entered the springs of the sea? Now, the book of Job, one of the oldest books in the Bible. Could be 4,000 years old. We don't know. It's an old book. 3,000, we can put it probably right around there, between 3 and 4. But anyway, this is the oldest book in the Bible, and it says, have you entered the springs of the sea? Do you know it wasn't until 1977 that scientists learned that there are freshwater springs in the ocean feeding the ocean? The Bible had it right all these years, and science finally figured it out in 1977. Also, notice how it says here, have you walked in the search of the depths of the sea? It just boggles our mind how deep the ocean can get. The deepest part of the ocean is about 7 miles deep. Just the pressure down there, 8 tons per square inch if you were down there. If you put a hole in your scuba tank, it would just rush in. It would actually crush all your bones. It would actually just crush the scuba tank is what it would do. But the pressure down at that depth is just so great. And God says, do you know how deep the ocean is? Surely, Job, you're so smart. Surely you know all these things. All right, let's keep going here. Where are we at? Verse 19. Where is the way of the dwelling of light? The darkness, where is its place, that you may take it to its territory, that you may know the path to its home? Do you know it because you were born then, or because the number of your days was great? Verse 22, have you entered the treasury of the snow, or have you seen the treasury of hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble? We've seen God do that before in the past, rain down hail. He will do it again. We find it in the book of Revelation. Verse 23, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war. By what way is light diffused, or the east wind scattered over the earth? Verse 25, who has divided a channel for the overflowing water, or the path for the thunder bait? God engineered the drainage system. God says, who divided a channel for the overflowing the water? God designed a drainage channel so that excess rain can run off into the ocean. It's probably why the United States is such a great nation, because we have the great Mississippi River right in the middle of it to move goods back and forth. Verse 26, to cause it to rain on land where there is no one, and wilderness in which there is no man, to satisfy the desolate waste and cause to spring forth the growth tender of grass. Verse 28, has the rain a father? Or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb came the ice and the frost of heaven, who gives it birth? The waters harden like stone, and the surface of the deep is frozen. Verse 31, can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades? The Pleiades is a constellation, the seven sisters. If you look up in the sky, you'll see it looks like a cluster. That's the Pleiades. Or loose the belt of Orion. Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season? Mazzaroth, I didn't check this one in other translations, but Mazzaroth, I think it means constellation. It could be a certain 12 constellations. Let's keep going here. Or can you guide the Great Bear with its cubs? The Great Bear, that'd be Ursa Major. The tail end is the Big Dipper. Do you know the ordinance of the heavens? Can you set their dominion over the earth? You ever look up at the stars? There's billions of them. And God made every one of them, planned them, put them right where they're supposed to be. Verse 34, can you lift up your voice to the clouds that an abundance of water may cover you? Can you send out lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the mind? The Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes understanding and knowledge. That's where all wisdom comes from. Who can number the clouds by wisdom, or who can pour out the bottles of heaven? When the dust hardens in clumps and the clods cling together, can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lion? When they crouch in their dens, or lurk in their lairs to lie in wait, who provides food for the ravens? So now God's going to taking care of the animals. When its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food. So God is calling Job out here. If you know all these things, let's hear it. Do you know what I know? Obviously, we know that. So God is basically putting Job in his place. He's saying, if you can't even understand these ordinary earthly things, then how can you understand what I'm doing in the heavenly realms? All right, we're done with Job chapter 38. Next week, we're going to do Job chapter 39. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Bye.